Have you ever felt overwhelmed by others' demands, lost in a whirlwind of responsibilities that aren't even yours? Do you find it difficult to say no, even when every fiber of your being is screaming for relief? Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend is more than just a guide to managing your time and energy. It's a blueprint for reclaiming your life, setting healthy limits, and finding the freedom to live authentically. The core idea, at its heart, boundaries is about defining what is and isn't your responsibility. The authors draw a clear line between what lies within your control, your feelings, attitudes, choices, and what doesn't, such as others' expectations, emotions, and actions. By establishing these boundaries, you create a safe space where you can thrive without guilt or burnout. Why boundaries matter? Henry Cloud and John Townsend emphasize that boundaries are not walls, but gates. They are not meant to shut out the world, but to ensure that what enters your life is healthy and beneficial. They enable you to say yes to the right things and no to the wrong ones, fostering healthier relationships and a stronger sense of self. A glimpse of what's to come. The book is structured around practical scenarios, ranging from family dynamics and romantic relationships to workplace challenges and spiritual life. It offers insights into how boundaries shape every aspect of our lives and provides actionable steps to implement them effectively. Part 1. What are boundaries? Chapter 1. A day in a boundaryless life. Imagine waking up already exhausted. The alarm blares, and instead of feeling ready for the day, you feel like you're already behind. This is Sherry's life, a whirlwind of obligations, guilt, and a never-ending to-do list. Sherry's day is a masterclass in what happens when you have no boundaries. Morning mayhem. Her kids won't get ready on their own, so she scrambles to dress them. She doesn't say no to their demands, fearing they'll feel unloved. By the time they're out the door, she's already frazzled. At work, her boss piles on projects. Despite knowing she can't handle more, she agrees. She wants to be seen as reliable, even if it costs her peace of mind. With friends, Sherry's friends call, needing favors. She drops everything to help, even though she's already stretched thin. She fears saying no would make her seem selfish. By the end of the day, Sherry collapses into bed, her mind racing with all she didn't accomplish for herself. She feels empty, resentful, and trapped. This chapter isn't just about Sherry. It's a mirror for anyone who feels like life is something that happens to them rather than something they steer. Chapter 2. What does a boundary look like? Okay, so if boundaryless living feels like being on a treadmill that never stops, what do healthy boundaries look like? The authors explain that boundaries are like invisible fences. Think of your life as a beautiful garden. Without a fence, anyone can trample through it, taking what they want and leaving a mess behind. Boundaries are the fence that protects your garden. They show where your responsibility begins and where it ends. Types of boundaries. Physical boundaries define personal space. They allow you to decide who can get close to you physically and under what circumstances. Emotional boundaries protect your feelings. They help you avoid taking on others' emotions as your own. Mental boundaries safeguard your thoughts and opinions. They allow you to hold your own beliefs without being swayed by others. Spiritual boundaries keep your values intact, even when the world pressures you to conform. Setting boundaries isn't about building walls, but about having gates where you can decide what to let in and what to keep out. Chapter 3. Boundary problems. If boundaries are so great, why do so many of us struggle with them? The authors introduce 4 common types of boundary issues, each as relatable as the last. Number 1. The compliant. The sure, I'll do it person. Compliants struggle to say no. They often feel responsible for others' feelings and live under a cloud of guilt. Number 2. The avoidant. The I'm fine person. Avoidants refuse help even when drowning. They keep others at arm's length, thinking independence is the only safe route. Number 3. The controller. The my way or the highway person. Controllers bulldoze others' boundaries. They might be openly aggressive or subtly manipulative, but the goal is the same, to get their way. Number 4. The non-responsive, the not my problem person. They ignore others' needs, either because they're too self-absorbed or too detached to care. These boundary issues often stem from deeper fears of rejection, loss of control, or vulnerability. Recognizing where you fit can be the first step toward change. Chapter 4. How boundaries are developed. Boundaries aren't something you're born with. They're like muscles. You develop them over time, often through trial and error. Childhood. When we're kids, our parents are our first teachers of boundaries. In healthy families, parents set limits with love. They say no, not to control, but to guide. They teach kids that choices have consequences, like not getting dessert if you skip dinner. Adolescence. Teenagers start pushing boundaries to define their independence. Healthy boundaries during this stage allow teens to make mistakes safely. A parent might say, "I'm here for you, but I won't rescue you from every consequence." Adulthood. By adulthood, boundaries should be well-formed, but often they're not. If you grew up in an enmeshed family where everyone's business was everyone else's, you might struggle to find your own voice. Or if you were neglected, you might not know how to ask for help. The good news? It's never too late to learn. You can reparent yourself, creating the boundaries you need, even if you didn't learn them early on. Chapter 5. 10 Laws of Boundaries. Boundaries aren't just abstract ideas. They're governed by practical laws. Number 1. The law of sowing and reaping. Your actions have consequences. If you shield others from consequences, you enable their behavior. Number 2. The law of responsibility. You are responsible to others, not for them. It's about support, not rescue. Number 3. The law of power. You only control your choices, not how others react to them. Number 4. The law of respect. To have your boundaries respected, you must respect others' boundaries. Number 5. The law of motivation. Real boundaries come from a place of love and self-respect, not from guilt or fear. Number 6. The law of evaluation. Setting boundaries may cause discomfort, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Number 7. The law of proactivity. Boundaries aren't just about saying no, but also about creating a safe space to say yes to what matters. Number 8. The law of envy. If you focus too much on others, you might avoid setting goals for yourself. Number 9. The law of activity. Don't wait for change, initiate it. Setting boundaries often means taking the first step. Number 10. The law of exposure. Boundaries must be clear and communicated. People aren't mind readers. These laws serve as a practical guide to building boundaries that are firm yet flexible, strong yet kind. Chapter 6. Common Boundary Myths. Henry Cloud and John Townsend tackle some pervasive myths that keep us stuck in unhealthy patterns. Myth. Boundaries are selfish. The truth? Boundaries allow you to give without resentment. Myth. Boundaries mean you're mean. Setting limits doesn't mean shutting people out. It means showing up as your best self. Myth. Boundaries hurt others. While they might create discomfort, they lead to healthier, more honest relationships. Myth. Boundaries are permanent. Boundaries can and should adapt as your circumstances change. The authors emphasize that boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are pathways to healthier, more authentic relationships. Conclusion of Part 1. Part 1 of Boundaries sets the stage for transformation. Through relatable stories, practical laws, and myth-busting truths, it shows that boundaries are not about keeping others out, but about letting the right things in. They help turn a life of chaos and exhaustion into one of balance and freedom. Part 2. Boundary Conflicts. Chapter 7. Boundaries and Your Family. Family, the place where love and support should thrive, can sometimes be the hardest ground for boundaries. Why? Because history, expectations, and emotions run deep. The authors dive into scenarios many of us know all too well. The overbearing parent, always involved, never letting go. They might call multiple times a day, expect you to spend every holiday together, and react with guilt when you try to set limits. The sibling dynamic. Perhaps your sibling always needs rescuing, financially or emotionally, and the family expects you to step in. Generational patterns. If you grew up in a boundaryless household, it might feel normal to overstep or be overstepped on. The key to setting boundaries with family lies in clear communication and consistency. It's about transitioning from being a child in the family system to being an adult with your own rules. You might say, I love you, but I need to leave if the conversation turns to criticism. Practical tip. Practice I statements. I feel overwhelmed when. Instead of you always make me. This reduces defensiveness and sets a clear boundary without accusation. Chapter 8. Boundaries and your friends. Friendships should feel safe and reciprocal, but when boundaries are lacking, they can become draining. The authors introduce scenarios like the friend who always takes. They call only when they need something, but when you need support, they're suddenly busy. The guilt tripper. They make you feel bad for not attending every hangout, even if you need time for yourself. The enabler. They encourage unhealthy behavior, whether it's overspending, overdrinking, or overcommitting. Healthy friendships involve give and take. Setting boundaries with friends might mean saying, I'm not available this weekend, without over-explaining or feeling the need to apologize. Practical tip. Assess if a friendship is life-giving or life-draining. Boundaries can help bring balance, but if the dynamic remains toxic, it might be time to reconsider the friendship altogether. Chapter 9. Boundaries and your spouse. Marriage can blur boundaries because love often leads to sacrifice, but where's the line between giving and losing yourself? The authors discuss how marriages can become boundaryless. The pleaser. One spouse constantly gives in to avoid conflict, leading to resentment. The controller. The other spouse makes all the decisions, leaving little room for partnership. Emotional enmeshment. When spouses expect each other to meet all emotional needs, it creates a dependency that can suffocate the relationship. Setting boundaries in marriage is about maintaining individuality within the union. It's okay to say, I need some time alone to recharge, or I'd prefer we make financial decisions together. Practical tip. Regularly check in with your spouse about boundaries. Ask questions like, do you feel heard? Or is there anything you need more or less of from me? Chapter 10. Boundaries and your children. Boundaries with kids aren't just about discipline. They're about teaching responsibility and respect. The authors highlight different parenting styles and their impact on boundaries. The permissive parent says yes to everything to avoid conflict, but this often leads to entitled children. The overprotective parent shields kids from every consequence, which hinders their ability to learn from mistakes. The authoritative parent sets clear boundaries with love, teaching kids that choices have consequences and freedom comes with responsibility. Healthy boundaries teach children that while their feelings are valid, their actions have limits. It might mean saying, you can be upset, but it's not okay to throw things. Practical tip. Use natural consequences to reinforce boundaries. If a child refuses to wear a coat, let them experience being cold, safely, of course. Experience is often a better teacher than words. Chapter 11. Boundaries and work. The workplace is fertile ground for boundary conflicts. Whether it's a demanding boss, gossiping colleagues, or unclear job expectations, setting boundaries is crucial for maintaining your sanity. Common work boundary issues include overcommitment, saying yes to every task to appear indispensable. Blurred lines, taking work home, answering emails at midnight, or sacrificing personal time for professional gain. Toxic environments, where boundaries are constantly tested, whether through inappropriate requests or micromanagement. The authors suggest setting clear work boundaries, like, I'm only available for work calls between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. I can take on that project, but I'll need an extension on this one. Practical tip. Define your work-life balance clearly to yourself first, then communicate it to others. The clearer you are, the easier it is to uphold your boundaries. Chapter 12. Boundaries and yourself. This chapter digs deep into the internal boundaries, the ones we set or fail to set with ourselves. Self-discipline. Keeping commitments to yourself, like waking up early or following through on personal goals. Emotional regulation. Not allowing your emotions to dictate every decision. You can feel anger without acting on it impulsively. Managing desires. Setting boundaries with things like food, spending, or technology. The authors highlight that boundaries with oneself are foundational. If you can't say no to yourself, it'll be harder to say no to others. Practical tip. Create internal dialogues that reinforce boundaries. I know I want this now, but I need to wait. Or, my feelings are valid, but they don't control my choices. Chapter 13. Boundaries and God. Spiritual boundaries might seem abstract, but they're just as important as physical or emotional ones. Understanding God's role. Many people struggle with boundaries in their spiritual lives, believing that being a good person means always putting others first. The misuse of religion. Some may manipulate religious teachings to break others' boundaries, such as using guilt or shame to control behavior. Healthy spirituality. The authors explain that God desires us to have healthy boundaries. Loving others doesn't mean losing yourself. It means giving from a place of fullness, not depletion. The chapter encourages readers to explore their spiritual boundaries and to understand that saying no can sometimes be a holy act. Practical tip: reflect on your spiritual beliefs and how they align with healthy boundaries. Are you giving from love or from fear? Conclusion of Part 2. Part 2 of Boundaries takes the theory of boundaries and throws it into the messy, beautiful reality of our everyday lives. Whether it's family, friends, work, or our relationship with ourselves and God, this section provides practical tools and real-world scenarios that show how boundaries can transform chaos into clarity. Part 3. Developing Healthy Boundaries. Chapter 14. Resistance to Boundaries. Setting boundaries isn't always met with applause. In fact, the authors highlight that resistance is inevitable, and not just from others, but also from within ourselves. Fear of rejection. Many people fear that setting boundaries will lead to rejection or alienation. What if people get angry, or worse, leave? Guilt and shame. It's common to feel guilty for saying no to someone you care about. Society often pushes us to be nice, which can make boundary setting feel uncomfortable. Fear of conflict. Boundaries often bring conflict, especially when people are used to you being flexible or accommodating. The authors explain that this resistance is natural, but doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. In fact, it's a sign that you're doing something right. Setting boundaries challenges long-standing patterns and creates discomfort as the status quo is disrupted. Practical tip: expect discomfort when setting new boundaries. Remind yourself that discomfort is temporary, but the long-term benefits of boundaries, clarity, respect, and healthier relationships are lasting. Chapter 15. How to measure success with boundaries. How do you know if your boundaries are actually working? The authors provide clear signs that your boundary-setting efforts are paying off. Increased respect. People begin to respect your time, energy, and emotional space. You'll notice that others stop overstepping as often. Less guilt. When boundaries are healthy, you'll feel less guilt and more peace. Saying no won't feel like a moral failing, but a responsible act. Greater clarity. You'll find it easier to make decisions. Instead of being constantly overwhelmed by others' needs, you'll be clear about your own limits. More freedom. As boundaries strengthen, you'll feel more empowered. You'll have the freedom to say yes to the things that truly matter and no to the things that drain you. However, the authors also caution that success is not linear. There will be setbacks, miscommunications, and moments when old habits resurface. This is normal, and it's important to keep measuring your progress and adjusting when necessary. Practical tip: keep a boundary journal. Reflect on times when you successfully upheld your boundaries and times when you struggled. Analyze what went well and where you can improve. This self-reflection can be a powerful tool for growth. Chapter 16. A Day in a Life with Boundaries. What does a day in the life look like when boundaries are firmly in place? The authors walk readers through a typical day, illustrating how boundaries make life smoother, less chaotic, and more fulfilling. Imagine waking up and feeling clear about your priorities. You know when you'll work, when you'll rest, and when you'll engage with others. You've set boundaries around your time, so distractions are minimized. Morning. You set aside time for self-care, whether it's a quiet breakfast, a jog, or simply having a cup of coffee without interruptions. You don't check work emails the moment you wake up because you've set that boundary. Work. You focus on tasks that align with your goals. When a colleague asks you to take on another project, you politely but firmly say, I'm currently at capacity and can't take on more right now. Evening. You've reserved time for your family or personal hobbies. You don't feel guilty about turning off your phone during dinner because you've made it a boundary to be present in the moment. Night. As you wind down, you don't feel overwhelmed by the demands of others. You've clearly communicated your boundaries and have respected your own needs throughout the day. By the end of the day, you feel accomplished, not just because you got things done, but because you respected your limits and took care of yourself. Practical tip. Start your day by setting an intention for your boundaries. For example, decide in the morning that you won't take work calls after 6 p.m. or that you'll make time for a 30-minute walk. Setting small, intentional boundaries at the start of each day will help reinforce the bigger ones. Conclusion of Part 3. In Part 3, the authors show us that developing healthy boundaries is a process of resistance, adjustment, and growth. The key is to push through the discomfort, measure your progress with honesty, and learn to live a life where your needs, values, and time are honored. It's a process of shifting from being reactive to being proactive in protecting your emotional, physical, and mental well-being. By learning to measure success and envisioning what a boundary-filled life looks like, you can create a future where boundaries are not just limits, but tools for living a more authentic, fulfilled life. Final takeaways from Boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. Boundaries teaches us that in order to lead healthy, fulfilling lives, we need to set and maintain limits with others, whether they are family, friends, colleagues, or even ourselves. The book's core message revolves around recognizing that without clear boundaries, we can end up feeling overwhelmed, drained, and often resentful. Key themes to remember. Number 1. Boundaries are necessary for healthy relationships. Boundaries are not about building walls to shut people out. They are about creating clear lines of respect, where both parties understand and honor each other's needs. Healthy boundaries help relationships flourish because they promote mutual respect and understanding. Number 2. Boundaries protect you emotionally, mentally, and physically. Setting boundaries is an act of self-care. It helps you prioritize your emotional health and gives you the space to nurture your own well-being. Without boundaries, it's easy to neglect yourself while constantly trying to meet others' demands. Number 3. Boundaries are a skill to be developed. Setting boundaries isn't always easy, especially when it goes against ingrained patterns of people-pleasing or avoiding conflict. But, like any skill, the more you practice, the easier it becomes to assert your limits confidently and respectfully. Number 4. Conflict is normal in boundary setting. You're likely to face resistance when you start enforcing boundaries. It might feel uncomfortable or even make others angry. But remember, healthy boundaries are ultimately about preserving relationships by fostering honest communication and respect. Conflict is often a sign that you're doing something necessary and transformative. Number 5. Boundaries allow you to live authentically. Once you understand how to set healthy boundaries, you'll find that life becomes more manageable. You'll be able to make decisions that align with your values, say no when necessary, and focus on what truly matters to you without feeling guilty. How you can apply the principles of boundaries in your life. Number 1. In your family. Family can be the hardest group to set boundaries with, but it's essential. For instance, if you're always expected to drop everything to help a family member, it's okay to say, "I need to take care of my responsibilities first." Start small and let your family know that respecting your time will actually make your relationship stronger. Number 2. In your work. Professionally, boundaries help protect your time and energy. If work constantly bleeds into your personal life, implement clear boundaries like having set office hours or deciding to check emails only during certain times. Saying no to extra tasks that aren't part of your role is also a healthy boundary. Number 3. In friendships. Sometimes, friendships can become emotionally taxing if you're always the one giving. If your friends expect too much of you, it's okay to express your needs and limitations. You don't have to say yes to everything to be a good friend. A simple, "I can't do that right now, but let's find another time," is a respectful boundary. Number 4. In your personal life. Boundaries can be incredibly freeing when you apply them to your personal space, time, and self-care routines. Whether it's reserving your mornings for self-care or ensuring you have time for hobbies, creating space for yourself is crucial for long-term happiness. Number 5. In your spiritual life. If you've been feeling spiritually drained or disconnected, setting boundaries around your spiritual practices can help you reconnect. Perhaps it's deciding not to overcommit to every spiritual or community event and instead focusing on practices that nourish your soul. Final thought. Learning how to set and maintain boundaries is a life-changing skill. It's not about cutting people off or being rigid. It's about honoring your needs, creating space for your well-being, and cultivating relationships that are rooted in mutual respect. As you incorporate these principles into your life, you'll likely see improvements in your overall happiness, productivity, and peace of mind. Now that we've explored the powerful principles of setting healthy boundaries, I hope you feel inspired and equipped to take control of your life, your relationships, and your well-being. Remember, boundaries aren't walls to shut people out. They're tools to protect your peace, your time, and your energy. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. And hey, I'd love to hear about your experiences with setting boundaries. Drop a comment below. How have boundaries shaped your life? Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, remember, setting boundaries is not just a choice, it's a way to live authentically. Stay true to yourself,